Hello and welcome back to our study of the book of Revelation. Today we are going to be looking at chapter 17, and I'm going to be reading out of the New Living Translation this week just because I feel like it was a little easier for me to really grab onto the language, although I spend most of the time studying in the NIV. So if you will read along with me. It says, "One of the 7 angels who had poured out the 7 bowls came over and spoke to me. 'Come with me,' he said, 'and I will show you the judgment that is going to come on the great prostitute who rules over many waters. The kings of the world have committed adultery with her, and the people who belong to this world have been made drunk by the wine of her immorality.' So the angel took me in the spirit into the wilderness, and there I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that had 7 heads and 10 horns, and blasphemies against God were written all over it. The woman wore purple and scarlet clothing, and beautiful jewelry made of gold and precious gems and pearls. In her hand she held a gold goblet full of obscenities and impurities of her immorality. A mysterious name was written on her forehead: Babylon the Great, mother of all prostitutes and obscenities in the world. I could see that she was drunk with the blood of God's holy people who were witnesses for Jesus. I stared at her in complete amazement." "Why are you amazed?" the angel asked. "I will tell you the mystery of this woman and of the beast with the 7 heads and the 10 horns on which she sits. The beast you saw was once alive, but isn't now, and yet he will come up from the bottomless pit and go into eternal destruction. And the people who belong to this world, whose names were not written in the book of life before the world was made, will be amazed at the reappearance of this beast who had died. This calls for a mind with understanding. The 7 heads of the beast represent the 7 hills where the woman rules. They also represent 7 kings. 5 kings have already fallen. The 6th now reigns, and the 7th is yet to come, but his reign will be brief. The scarlet beast that was, but is no longer, is the 8th king. He is like the other 7, and he too is headed for destruction. The 10 horns of the beast are 10 kings who have not yet risen to power. They will be appointed to their kingdoms for one brief moment to reign with the beast. They will all agree to give him their power and authority. Together they will go to war against the Lamb, but the Lamb will defeat them because he is the Lord of all lords and the King of all kings. And his called and chosen faithful ones will be with him. Then the angel said to me, 'The waters where the prostitute is ruling represent masses of people of every nation and language. The scarlet beast and his 10 horns all hate the prostitute. They will strip her naked, eat her flesh, and burn her remains with fire. For God has put a plan into their minds, a plan that will carry out his purposes. They will agree to give their authority to the scarlet beast, and so the words of God will be fulfilled. And this woman you saw in your vision represents the great city that rules over the kings of the world." All right, so that was the reading of Revelation 17. As you think about symbols and symbols in the book of Revelation, you start to pay attention and start seeing that there's a lot of imagery. Now, you can overread it, but it's also important that we don't underread it, that we notice. One of the things, for instance, that I have not mentioned yet, that I know of, is the use of colors. There are constantly colors mentioned in the book of Revelation. So, for instance, here we have a scarlet beast. We have scarlet, we have purple, we have gold. So we see different colors, and these colors are to evoke images in our minds. We also see constant numbers, but they tend to be similar numbers. A number that we see constantly is the number 7. And in the case here, we've come through 3 sets of 7 judgments. And that is not coincidental, because 3 and 7 have important numbers, have an important meaning. 7 is the number of God. 3 represents a holy completion. And so when we see 3 times 7, we're seeing God's holy perfection being played out. And so that's why we constantly see these numbers repeated. Now, sometimes, for instance, we're going to see the seven heads, we'll see that an image can have multiple interpretations, multiple meanings. And so like we see, for instance, it's actually interesting because the angel interprets some of the vision to John, and he tells him some of the things, what they are. So for instance, he says that the seven heads of the beast represent the seven hills where the woman rules. They also represent seven kings. So we see here that seven heads represent two different things. It represents hills and it represents kings. And we'll talk about that in just a second. But what's going on here? At the beginning, the angel says, "Come with me, and I will show you the judgment that is going to come on the great prostitute, who rules over many waters." This is going to be echoed again later in chapter 21 when the angel is going to say, "Come with me and I will show you." But in that case, he won't be showing a great prostitute, he'll be showing a bride. And that brings me to a theme in the book of Revelation that we need to be aware of, and that is the imagery of women and representing different things. So in the book of Revelation, we actually see 4 different women as major characters that tell the story of good versus evil. So we have 2 evil women and 2 good women. We see Jezebel. Jezebel in the Old Testament was this evil queen who put prophets to death. So that's an apt picture for Babylon, because Babylon was putting the prophets to death. Like we saw here, that they were drunk on the blood of God's holy people. So Jezebel is a good picture of that. And then we see the great prostitute. And then, we have Jezebel and the great prostitute, 2 women on the bad side. And then we see the woman in Revelation 12, who the dragon wanted to eat her child and wanted to kill her other children. And then we see in Revelation 21, the bride of Christ. So we see a contrast, particularly between the bride and the prostitute. And this is actually a common Old Testament thing, that in the Old Testament, Israel was often referred to as a woman. And when Israel was faithful to God, Israel was portrayed as a faithful bride. And when Israel was unfaithful to God, it was portrayed as being an adulterous woman. And so here we have these different women. And so right now we're seeing particularly the great prostitute in contrast to the bride of Christ. It was also common even in Roman and Greek culture to associate cities with women. And Rome in particular was actually often associated with the goddess Roma, who was kind of the embodiment of the power of Rome. And so just keep that in mind, the image of these 2 women who are in contrast with one another and are showing the difference between Babylon and Jerusalem. And that's really, I think, the main point that we're looking at here. Because if you see at the beginning, the angel says, "Come with me and I will show you the judgment." But we don't actually see judgment in this chapter. We see a setup. We see this is who the woman is. We're giving an image of who this great prostitute is. What is this great prostitute like? We'll actually see the destruction in the next chapter. And she must be destroyed if Jerusalem is going to come, if the new Jerusalem is going to come. But what is this great prostitute like? Well, it says, she was sitting on a scarlet beast and had 7 heads and 10 horns, and blasphemies against God were written all over it. The woman wore purple and scarlet clothing and beautiful jewelry made of gold and precious gems and pearls. So this great prostitute is dressed opulently and beautifully. She seems to have it all. And in the process, she is blaspheming against God. And her gold goblet, though, is full of obscenity and immorality. So it looks this beautiful thing, but she's full of obscenity and immorality. And it says the mysterious name was written on her forehead, Babylon the Great, the mother of all prostitutes and obscenities in the world. I could see that she was drunk with the blood of God's holy people. So she's living well. She's got money. She's got wealth. She has glamour. She's doing her thing. But in the end, it's all obscenity. And so, wait a minute. This sounds a lot like our world, doesn't it? Don't we see this in our world, that so much that looks so beautiful and attractive is actually filled with obscenity and immorality? So, something to consider. Not only that, listen to what it says about her in verse 2. It says, "The kings of the world have committed adultery with her, and the people who belong to this world have been made drunk by the wine of her immorality." So she seems to have it all. She's beautiful, attractive, all this jewelry and fine clothing. But it's obscenity and immorality that is being exported to the world. All of the world is consuming the immorality that she is putting out. Now, he's amazed by this vision. An angel says, "Why are you amazed? I will tell you the mystery." So the angel actually interprets for him several things. He tells him that the beast was once alive, but isn't now, and he will soon come up out of the bottomless pit. He's telling him that the beast represents a false Messiah, a counterfeit Messiah. And he will go to eternal destruction, which is what's going to happen, right? And then the people who belong to this world, whose names were not written in the book of life before the world was made, will be amazed at the reappearance of this beast. So it's interesting because the world rejects Christ, but they're going to be amazed and impressed by the counterfeit Christ. And that sounds a lot like the world we live in, that people are amazed by counterfeits. And then the real thing is right there, and they're like, "Nah." I think that's what we're seeing here is, they're amazed by this counterfeit of the Christ. But they reject the real Christ, and they persecute his people. And so here's another thing. It says, whose names were not written in the book of life before the world was made. Some people take this to say, like predestination. They weren't written down before the world was made. But I'm just saying that argument goes too far, because in Revelation chapter 3, John says that names can be blotted out of the book of life. So you can't take this to just mean it's predestination. Rather, this is talking about an eternal plan, an eternal purpose, and an eternal fulfillment of God's kingdom, and it's being set up in contrast with those who oppose it. So now the angel tells him that this calls for a mind with understanding. We saw that earlier, and when he proposed a riddle with the 666, he said this takes a mind of understanding. So now he says this calls for a mind of understanding. The 7 heads of the beast represent the 7 hills where the woman rules. This one's pretty clear. I think anyone who's taken a history class recognizes exactly what he's talking about when he says the 7 heads represent the 7 hills where the woman rules. Rome is famous as being the city built on 7 hills. It's been known that way for thousands of years. The city built on 7 hills. In fact, I walked up the famous Palatine Hill this summer. So Rome has these hills that are all around, the 7 hills. He's clearly talking about Rome. But it's not just Rome. It's more than that. I wanted to read what Craig Keener said in his commentary. He said, "The great prostitute was Rome, to be sure, for the given historical moment. But not she alone. In reality, the summation of all that which is prostitution, as Babylon was in her time, who became the symbol of it." So he's saying that John's talking about Rome, but Rome is just the current manifestation of it at that historical moment, just like Babylon was the manifestation of it in its historical moment. So we need to be thinking about what is the manifestation of Rome in our historical moment. And that's really the key of this passage that I want to think about. So so rather than sexual prostitution per se, this prostitution involves unfaithfulness to God's covenant, being in communication with the religious and spiritual powers, with the satanic sources and esotericism. The spirit of Babylon and Rome, which John calls a new Babylon, outlasts both individual empires to represent evil empires as the world in its most tyrannical form. The issue in Revelation 17 and 18 is not simply that Rome is an evil empire. The issue is that its privileged position in international trade made it a prime exporter of immorality. Who is exporting immorality around the world today? I'm not even going to answer it. I'm going to let you think about it. What culture is doing that? Where is that coming from? Because that's the spirit of Babylon at work in the world today. So look around and see, what is the power? What is the earthly power today? What is the system today that's spreading immorality and rejection of God around the world? It's pretty breathtaking when you think about it. So, the seven heads also represent seven kings. I've really struggled with this one. People have tried to figure it out, and they think, well, maybe it's these emperors and this emperor and that emperor. A couple of commentators have said the important thing is not exactly who they are, but rather that we're seeing again that number 7 and then plus 1, 8. And we said earlier that Jesus' number was 888. And so he's again identifying these kings with a false God, a false Messiah. The angel also interprets the water and says the water represents all the people. So it's pretty good when you don't even have to interpret, because the angel does it for you. He tells you that the waters represent all the peoples of all over the world. So the authorities, there's these other kings that came up, and they actually hate the great prostitute. They're turned against it. But at the same time, they're united in their war against the Lamb. And so all the kings and now all the powers in the world unite against the Lamb. But the Lamb will defeat them, because he is the Lord of all lords and the King of all kings. And this is a direct dig at the Roman emperor, who was called the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. Because there were other kings in the world, but they were under his authority. So in this case, we see the true King of Kings is Jesus Christ, the Lamb. All right. So we see here the apparent glory and power of the beast and the prostitute. We saw that the beast was scarlet and had horns. All of these things connect the beast with the dragon that we saw earlier. We've said that images can have multiple meanings. We've talked about how John is talking about Rome, but that Rome is just where it's centered in his day. And there's something timeless here. And that this is what I want us to consider. What would we consider Babylon today? So he's equating Rome then with the spirit of Babylon that came sooner. So where is Babylon active in the world today? And how are we being loyal to Babylon? How much of Babylon are we connected to? How much hold does Babylon have over you? And I think this is a challenge, because as Christians, we want to be faithful to God, but we have a tendency to prostitute ourselves with other powers and other authorities. We really do. And so let's just think about that this week. Where is Babylon active today? How am I loyal to it? How is it active in my life? And recognize that her destruction is coming. This has been a challenging chapter, because I've just been thinking about Babylon. What is Babylon like? Where is it? How is it active? And how are we standing against it? Because that's ultimately the call. To be loyal to the Lamb and stand against it. All right, God bless you. That's enough for this week. I will see you next time.